We are very happy to have you here today. And I'm a little bit nervous to start here today. When I'm nervous, I always think like perhaps it's a good reminder how people can feel when they take their first steps into the therapy room and perhaps meet a social worker, a psychologist, or a doctor, and how important it is to feel that you're in the moment. So I hope that we are going to create this warm room today, and we are all a part of this process.
Could we imagine this in '89?
No.
When I stepped into the Galveston Family Institute, as it was called by then, because I wanted to have a time to study to become a really skilled family therapist, to know the techniques. And little did I know what was to happen. And recently I found some notes from the first 10 days at the Institute. Would you like to hear what I wrote down?
What you wrote down? I think we're all curious now.
I quoted people I had heard there, so I don't know what's you and what's other people.
Okay.
When we talk about patients, we should talk about them in such a way that they any time could enter into the conversation. I think that is still valid. And it is just as much needed now. And another one is, one goal in therapy is to provide a context for an increasing sense of agency. And when, after having coming back, I wanted to translate the papers that Harlene Anderson and Harry Golishan had written, sense of agency was one of the most difficult things. Upplevelse av handlingsförmåga. How simple is that? So we had a lot of struggle with this concept, but also that it meant a shift for my own part in my practice to think of the importance that people would feel some possibility to move, some sense of being able to think in another way or do something differently. That didn't have to do with any kind of concept of what is good, what is bad, what is right therapy or wrong therapy, but simply had to do with being a human being. Could you take one more?
If you would like, of course, yes.
A person in therapy should be permitted to act competently rather than to be educated to be competent. And what I heard, what I picked up by then was that both the therapists in training at the Institute and the faculty of the Institute were so eager to hear from people. Well, how did you do that? Or how would you like to change that? And how would you do if that would happen again? So the eagerness was very, very obvious, and I see that eagerness even today. And when I found these notes not long ago, I was so touched by, after 10 days at the Institute, I had got something of the core of what you were doing at the time and talking about at the time. And then I want to use that as a presentation because the openness and generosity of the staff, including Harlene, was what enabled me as a foreigner and not very experienced therapist catch those important things. We want to comment some on that, or?
No, not at this moment. Thank you. I was just thinking, what a charming sense of humor you have. And how I always like to listen to you talk because you put words together in such a wonderful way that helps to kind of draw vivid pictures.
Thank you. And I'm a bit nervous. I have to my notes. We have met in several places in the States, and finally in 2005 you got me to come to your summer institute in Mexico, and I went there for 3 years, and there I saw the same ideas in a Mexican context by the Mexican therapists, which was very different and yet the same. But it was more sort of
They're very active.
And we met in Norway and in Czech Republic and I don't know where more, and in Sweden several times. And one question I never asked you was how, because in these meetings I've always got new friends and with lasting friendships in many cases. And I wonder, how do you do to gather so interesting people?
I think they self-select. I do.
You invite and they come.
And they come.
And recently I found that that these ideas travel to other areas as well, other than therapy and supportive work of different kinds. So in my little village, I was doing a documentary book together with a couple of other villagers, and I didn't know at the time that what I found there would be so congruent with your work and your thinking, with ideas like the Can I do something? But I was going to say the relational mind. Something happens. Maybe we should. Less relational. But I want to tell this anyway.
Please, yes.
I was interviewing Anders, 91 years old, and he had been a neighbor of my grandparents, and I was very interested, and he was telling this event when he was like 3-4 years old, and this lady was helping his mother with baking, and she was telling him that once when she was helping with slaughter in a neighboring village, she got some meat as a salary for her job, and she took the meat in her apron and went through the forest to her own village, and a wolf came after her, and she was terrified, of course, and both whether she would be attacked or if she would lose her precious meat. So, because I wrote down and was very eager to get that. Then, a couple of months later, I was there again at this old age home where he lived, and he was so upset. It was wrong. Det blev fel det där som jag sa. It was wrong what I said. And I couldn't understand why he was so upset. What could have been so difficult? It wasn't her, it was her mother who had been going through the woods. So it was so important for him to get generations right and to get his inner world of people right. And so when I first thought, what's the matter? I understood that this was very important for him. And then I could listen to other people, so listening to that they had to wait a little before they talked, because they had to wait for the people who were relevant before saying their own, speaking up their own mind. So what could be seen as jantelagen was the opposite, that it was including important people when you talk. So I'm so thankful for the kind of ideas that you and your colleagues have spread through the world, and that enabled me to also listen to Bröms Anders in another way. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for your friendship and colleagueship over the years, and for that story. I'm going to remember it because I think it's important to give people time to collect their thoughts before they speak, and we don't often do that.
Thank you.
A beautiful story. Thank you. Okay, so I'm Harlene Anderson. I'm from Houston, Texas, and just to help you with your geography, Texas is kind of in the middle of the United States at the bottom, and at the bottom we're adjacent to the country of Mexico and the Gulf of Mexico. So we have a lot of Hispanic influence. I'm with the Houston Galveston Institute, which is now in its 38th year. It's a training center, counseling center, consultation center, research center. I'm also with the Taos Institute, which is a virtual organization dedicated to the exploration and application of social construction theory to psychotherapy and organizations primarily. And we're in our 23rd year. I do a variety of things. I travel around and meet interesting people like you who inspire me. And I write some, I consult with organizations, with leaders, and I see some very few people in psychotherapy. And I advise doctoral students on their thesis, and I just do a variety of things. And that's what inspires me and keeps me alive and keeps my ideas emerging. So I think it'll be interesting to hear comments from those of you that I've met perhaps some years ago, or perhaps who've read some of my writings some time ago, as you compare and contrast what I say today with then. There are definitely similarities. There's a thread that runs through. There are some things that I emphasize more today that I didn't previously, and some things that I emphasized then that I don't emphasize as much today. And I think that's because it's just so much a natural part of who I am that I don't pause and think about some aspects of my work the way that I did previously. When we formed the Institute, we were first in Galveston, which was a small city for Texas of about 60,000 people. We're now in Houston, which has over 4 million people. It happens to be the most multicultural city in the United States, more so than New York, if you can believe that. But that's what the census says. So in the public schools, children speak something like 180 different languages in terms of their native tongue. So it's a challenge for the educational systems. A lot of people moving in to our area. But when we formed the Institute, the four of us who formed it had been at a medical school with a family therapy program, which had been originated there in the late 1950s. So I began studying in 1970 with a group of people with a long tradition of exploring working with families and other systems. And because of some changes in the leadership in the psychiatry department, we decided we wanted to form our own institute where we could do more what we really wanted to do. And we started out as it was kind of this thing we did in the evenings and the weekends. And then very quickly we realized this is what we wanted to do all the time. So one by one, I was the first one to leave. We left the medical school and started the Institute as a full-time center. But when we were forming the Institute, we wanted to reflect on what were our values. What did we think allowed us to continually change and to be challenging of the traditions of psychotherapy and psychiatry that we had been operating in. And let me just name perhaps 3 or maybe 4. One was that we thought it was always important to work with a variety of people from a variety of walks of life and to not focus on working with only one kind of person or one kind of problem, but to be challenged. And then we also felt that it was important for us to always work in an environment where we were creating learning programs, which you might call teaching or supervising or consulting with other therapists. Because we felt like that, like today, as you will do, that the comments they made, the questions they posed, pushed us to continually think about and to try to put into words some of our experiences and some of our preferences and biases about psychotherapy. And then we also felt that it was important, and I think maybe this is number 4, for us to be lifelong learners. At the medical school, we had a, we just called it our Tuesday evening seminar, where the faculty would get together and we would read and share practices and talk. And so we initiated that when we formed the Institute. And not only the faculty, but also the interns or the graduate students who were studying with us for 6 months or a year. So learning has always been important for us, and being challenged about what we think and what we believe has always been important. And I think those are the ingredients that have helped us to continually develop and evolve our work. So today I call my work collaborative dialogic practices. I've called it different things over the years, but that's kind of what I've landed on for now. The word collaborative is a difficult word to translate into some languages, and it also has a meaning that's not very favorable for some people. I remember the very first time that Harry Galish and I went to Norway, and we were introducing ourselves in the title of our work, and hands went up. Oh my gosh, questions already, but they were hands of alarm. Why are you using the word collaborative? Don't you know that here collaborative does not have a good connotation? It comes from the French word collaborateur, which means collaborating with the enemy, referring to some of the Norwegians in World War II and other people. So, and that was in the late 1980s. And from that time until now, I'm always saying, if someone has another word that I can use, please let me know. But so far I haven't come up with another word. The word collaborative came from working in a medical center, a medical school, where the popular word was cooperative. That you wanted cooperative patients, cooperative clients. In other words, you wanted clients and patients to do what made the doctor, the nurses, or the therapist happy. In other words, it was used to describe a person who was compliant. They did what you wanted them to do. And so we didn't want to use the word cooperative. So I started thinking and searching in the dictionary and came upon the word collaborative, and then I would go back and look at the word cooperative. And at least in the English dictionaries, the definitions are almost precisely the same. The word that from definitions of collaborative that I highlight, and I highlighted then and I highlight even more now, is this notion of with, the notion of doing with another person, talking with, thinking with, acting with, puzzling with, as opposed to how I was trained early on, that as a professional, you're an expert who talks to, for, and about people. So our work, that just didn't describe our work. I also use the term withness now and think of my work as a withness kind of practice. And that's influenced by the social psychologist John Schotter and the American family therapist Lynn Hoffman, who wrote about what they called a withness practice, referring to collaborative and similar kinds of practices. And they were influenced by the Russian, I call philosopher, Mikhail Bakhtin, because he talks about withness thinking versus aboutness thinking, or withness being versus aboutness being. Okay, so this morning, I'll highlight some ideas, some things that I say I'm biased or prejudiced toward. I use bias and prejudice in a positive sense, meaning this is a direction that pulls me, and give you plenty of opportunity to talk with each other, to pose questions, to make comments, to offer your challenges. And then this afternoon, maybe we can put these ideas into action, okay? And what that means is that I'll look for a volunteer or 2 or 3 to have a conversation with me about something important in your life right now. So you might just start thinking about that and think about if you want to volunteer. And if you want to know more about what I'm thinking about, just talk to me when we take a break. You may be wondering, what in the world is this? For me, this is kind of an image of the way I think about my practice. I had the opportunity to go to Havana, Cuba last January, and our host was walking me and my colleagues around. We had gone there to do some workshops with several different groups. And we went into this square, San Francisco Square, I think it was called. And in that square, it was full of all these huge bears. You may have seen them in Stockholm. It's some kind of world traveling exhibit. And it's bears in various countries would decorate this bear. They were all the same, kind of big, I guess, huge plastic bears, probably 6 or 8 feet tall. Big. And so they were decorated in different ways. And so there were lots of people there looking at those. And then all of a sudden, walking around looking at the bears, this statue caught my eye. And I looked at it, and then I looked at the title, and the title is called, in Spanish, Conversación, conversation. And so then when I got to ask my host about it, she told me that it was by a French sculptor named Etienne, E-T-I-E-N-N-E, and that he had been commissioned by the Minister of Cultural Affairs in Cuba to create a sculpture for this square that was representative of the Cuban people and the Cuban culture. And so the sculptor, who had been in Cuba for a while, decided that Cubans talk a lot. They relate to each other. They're friendly. And so he created this. And I just love it. And I'm going to show you another view of it. And I'll relate what I'm going to say in a few minutes to it to tell you why I find it interesting. It's quite large, and it's out of bronze, just in case you're interested. Okay, so I think of my work as being informed by postmodern philosophy and related philosophies and theories. And I think of, as they say in writing, that if you're a good writer, there's always like a red thread that runs through your writing that connects the ideas, that helps the reader follow the flow. So I think of postmodern assumptions from various theories, various other philosophies, like social construction or hermeneutics or dialogue or language, as having kind of all these different little knots on this red thread. And so there's a similarity. And let me just mention 3 of them now, which may be familiar to you. By the way, how many people in here have I met in person before? Okay. Nice, okay. And how many have I met on the pages of a book? Oh, this is terrific, okay. And so, to help me, how many of you, this is your first time? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm asking because what I want to do is to try to talk in a way that I say something that's useful for each of these broad 3 clusters, although there's a lot of differences within those. But having said that, for me to pull out some things to emphasize that will be useful to you, I need your help. Okay? So what I would like to do is ask you to turn to your neighbors as best you can in this, by the way, this lovely, beautiful room. And thank you for inviting me. I didn't say that. I was so overtaken by Sherston's charm that I forgot my good manners. Which I think, for those of you who know me, I think good manners are very important for a therapist. Okay, so I want you to turn with each other and just share why you came today. What are your hopes? What are your expectations? What do you hope to leave with at the end of the day? And then I'll take a quick sampling. So you'll help guide me. You'll help me in terms of what to select, to pull forward, to share with you. Okay? So let's just try 5 minutes at the most. I will apologize now because several times today I will ask you to speak and then I'll interrupt you right in the middle of a sentence. But we just have a short amount of time to be together, so we have to see what we can do in that amount of time. Okay, so I'd like just a sampling, if you would help me. A sampling. How about if we start over here, and I'm just going to make some notes on this paper to help my memory, okay? And then we'll check at the end of the day. Oh, I can write on this as well? Who would like to volunteer? or who might like for me to volunteer you? Just to share some of what you were talking with your seatmates about. And okay. If you prefer to say it in Swedish, that's okay. Someone can help me.
You're talking a lot about, om man pratar på svenska, så tilltal eller samtal. Och vi pratade också om kooperativa tankar respektive kollaborativa tankar i mötet med människor. Att det har en väldigt stor betydelse i vårt dagliga arbete med såväl familjer, enskilda som vem vi möter. Ungefär så. Stämmer det?
Luke, can you translate?
We were talking a lot about the difference, as you talked about, Harlene, concerning cooperative versus collaborative, and in Swedish, tilltal versus samtal, and the importance of that in every kind of meeting with people.
The difference between speaking to someone or speaking
With, okay. Okay. I don't expect that you will be able to read this because of the size of my handwriting.
They were talking about the context that we work in. It's often either medical models or new management organizations that we have to work in, and how we can, well, personally, how I can strengthen my base. That's what I want to come with today, to work in such a context. Is that what Lisa you were?
Okay.
And
Okay, collaborating in these contexts with a question mark. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, how about in the center here? This side of the center. Who would like to volunteer? Okay.
I'm here only for, I want to see you and hear you.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Since I was really sitting in the
Yes.
audience in Norway, we were talking about
Yes.
this reaction, I felt that I really want to see you again and sort of see where are you today and
Okay.
compare with where I am. So that was my curiosity. It's my
Okay.
curiosity.
Thank you. Okay, this part of the center.
We talked about, I talked about first, it's like is here today because I want to have some refilling. I don't know if that is the right word, but then we talked about traveling on an ocean and some way we are on an island, and pick up some proviant
I'm
and
sorry, the last word?
food. Supplies.
Food,
Supplies,
okay,
yeah.
yes.
And then we go in the almost and then we are going further. Yeah, we are going travel.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
You
okay.
understand what I said? Thank you.
I reversed it. Okay, so pick up supplies. that will help you travel further.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, hi.
Hi, we were sitting here in the back and was hoping to read some of your sheets of information and all this great stuff you've been writing, not being techniques and in conversation, but at the same time there are small tips and tricks. And we were hoping on leaving here today with some kind of hands-on. How do you do that? How do you get these techniques not being techniques?
Yeah,
Instead of something that you're really able to are. You just are there with your patient or student or whatever. How do you do this hands-on?
How do you do this? Yeah, okay. Hands-on, how do?
And of course one part is like the Alice said, that just seeing you and the way you are is going to help us a lot.
Okay, well you can let me know at the end of the day if my walk and talk's congruent with what you think it should be. Okay, so yeah, hands-on, how do you do it? If you don't think in terms of techniques, how do you know where to go or how to get there? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we'll move over here now. Okay.
I read somewhere in your articles that the collaborative approach is ethical, but also political.
I think so. Yes. Okay.
I would like to hear more about that.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to also have to read my own handwriting at the end of the day. Okay, thank you. Someone else in this section.
I think we said some of the same things that other people have mentioned.
Okay.
And I guess our group looks up to you. So one of us said that we'd like to be close to you, almost like being touching greatness. So maybe inspiration, I guess.
Inspiration.
And I guess this political, I think most of us work in environments, contexts where we have to produce, help people, cure people. We're teaching them and working, talking to them. Also like to see a little bit how do you get it to be more equal?
Mm-hmm.
We can talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So I'm going to, in a way, connect these two. So how do you have a more egalitarian relationship and process? So I see that connected to hands-on and how do you do it. Okay, this is terrific. Thank you. This will help me. Okay, now I just want to insert here that what I like to do when I start with a group like this is I like to ask, I'm not going to have you do this, it would be absolutely a traffic jam. But, you know, when we go to workshops and meetings and things, we sit with people and we talk with people that we know, and we don't have an opportunity to meet and talk with other people. And I think meeting and greeting is very important in terms of how you do that and what you can do together. So I often ask people to take 1 moment, 1 minute, and find someone that they don't know in the room and introduce themselves and talk. And then depending on the size of the group, I'll do that 2, sometimes 3 times. And it really helps people begin to loosen up and begin to talk with each other. And I think that's not only an important part of a workshop, but I also connect that with therapy in terms of how do you invite people to talk and be more natural and more spontaneous, and how can you do that yourself. So some of the things that I've been saying and the things that I will begin to say, I think of as orienting assumptions. So these are some of the knots on the thread that I think are important. And I usually talk about 7 of them, which are listed on your handout. I'm only going to highlight 3 of them right now. And the first one that I'm going to highlight has to do with, and Michael, maybe you can, let's see, what do we need to do to, or they can look at their handouts. Yeah. No, we're just going to go way down. How do we do that? Oh, here we go. Oh, wait, here we go. There we go. Okay, got it. Okay. So I call these orienting assumptions. They orient us. They don't tell us what to do or how to do it, but it's helping us have a sense of what we might do. So my work, and when you ask how do you do it, is informed by these 7 assumptions. So the first one I call maintaining skepticism. So often people think that postmodern and related ideas mean that you have to throw away everything that you already know, or that you have to pretend you never knew it, or that it's never there. Well, that's totally, totally impossible to do. You can't get rid of your history and all that you've accumulated and developed over the years. That's totally impossible. And that's not what postmodernism asks of us. What it asks of us is to always be in a questioning, a skeptical position. In other words, that we are born into, we live in, we swim in a world of all kinds of inherited knowledge. Knowledge that's out there in the world that we've inherited and we kind of take on without ever really, really often for most of us thinking about it. Why does this appeal to us? So we never pause and step back and think, not only why does this appeal to me, but what does it allow or permit me to do, or what does it not allow or not permit me to do? Whatever your particular theoretical orientation is for psychotherapy. Where did that come from? Where do some of the traditions of psychotherapy, like the ideas about boundaries or self-disclosure or resistance, or where do those ideas come from, and what relevance do they have in our world today? Particularly when you think in terms of our world today and how fast it's changing and how people, it seems almost everywhere in one way or another, sometimes peacefully and sometimes not so, unfortunately, are demanding to have a voice in terms of decisions that affect their lives, policies that affect their lives. They don't want other people to tell them what they need or what they should be doing, but they want to have a voice. And so I think that for me it's important to think, okay, what are the theories, the philosophies that inform our practice that, for me again, allow the people that I'm working with, as well as for myself, to have a voice, so that therapy is something they participate in designing, that I'm not designing it for them. Connected with that, number 2 is avoiding generalizations. That often when you work from a body of knowledge or a particular dominant discourse, particular psychotherapy discourse, we tend to think in terms of categories or types or kinds of people or problems. And what happens when we do that, not only do we think we know the other person and what their problem is and what the solution should be before they've hardly even told us their story, sometimes only by reading the referral person's notes or someone's diagnosis, that when you think you already know the person or you already know about this particular problem, you've met this kind of person before, you've worked with this kind of problem over and over and over again, you forget that each person, each problem is really unique. That although there may look like there's similarities, we were talking about this yesterday with a small group, talking about families in the social welfare system where parents, after almost a decade, are still fighting over the children. And you think, oh, I've worked with hundreds of families like this. Yes, you can find similarities if you're looking for them, but I find that it's those uniquenesses are what you might think of as the unfamiliar, are really the differences that add the richness for possibilities and the potential for something to be different and unique and individually tailored for this particular family or this particular person. Gregory Bateson once said, in order for there to be room for the unfamiliar, the newness, there has to be room for the familiar, the usual. And so I find that it's important for me in the way that I work that there's room for a person to be themselves, to describe their problem, to use the words they want to use, and not the words that I want to use for it. Privileging local knowledge is another one. The term local knowledge comes from Foucault's writings and his work, and that refers to what I call the expertise that the people that I work with, whether it's someone in a therapy room, a leader on a team in an organization, or someone who's participating in this workshop, that you bring your own expertise, you bring your own local knowledge. In other words, you bring your own history, your own culture, your own rituals, your own language, your own preferences with you. And that I have come to believe over the years that each of us have resources and strengths and talents and gifts that sometimes we may not be aware that we have, sometimes we are aware that we have them, but we don't use them. But the importance of how to help someone be able to access their own local knowledge and to be able to use that in the fullest. And also to have a sense that you have respect for them and what they're bringing. This doesn't mean that you necessarily have to agree with them. That's not the important thing, but that there's room for those differences, for those distinctions, and that your own local knowledge that you bring can also be challenged by the persons, people, or individuals that you're working with. So let me just look at my notes and see what little jewels I have written down that I might want to share with you about these three things. I have to go back. Well, I may not find it real quickly. Okay. So I say there are assumptions that influence a way of thinking about ourselves, the people we work with, and what we do together. I say that they're often invisible, taken for granted. As I said a moment ago, that we often don't take the time to pause, to step back and reflect on why a particular idea, a particular discourse, a particular body of knowledge appeals to us, what it allows or permits us to do, and what it does not allow or does not permit us to do. And I think that the postmodern idea of maintaining skepticism invites us to always be willing to inquire, to look into, to question and reflect, not only on our own ideas, our own biases, and to be able to be challenged, but also to try to be aware of those things that, again, are invisible, that we just use, ideas we operate from, that we really do not keep an awareness in front of us. I say that generalizations, it's categorizing and generalizing, is usually unilateral. In other words, it's a one-way street. We're generalizing, we're categorizing the person or the particular quote-unquote problem that we're working with. That it's an outside interpretation that comes from the professional's map, from the professional's history, from the professional's biases. and the risk and seduction of only seeing the familiar or only looking for what you know is there, again, risk getting in the way of being able to see the unfamiliar or the novelty, the nuances, or the uniqueness of any one person in their life situation. And John Schotter cautions against falling into a continuous rediscovery of the sameness. A continuous rediscovery of the sameness. For those of you who might be familiar with John Schotter, you may have met him or you may have done his readings. You may not know that he's very critically ill. And I'll just say that he's extremely critically ill. And he has just completed a new book that's being published by Gail Simon at University of Bedfordshire in England. And let's see, today is the 20-something, right? 21st. Supposedly it was published on the 18th of this month. So it'll be his last writing. And I can email how to get access to this book. I think it will probably be available online as an ebook. Okay. Ian Hacking, who authored a book called The Social Construction of What, he says, for example, he says, constructing categories such as refugee women constitutes the category, not the person. So, in other words, our professional discourses can influence our creating the people sitting in front of us, if that makes any sense. We see what's come from our professional discourse rather than the person as they want us to see or to experience them. And for me, that's very important in my own work. How do you want me to see and hear you? How do you want me to know you? What do you want me to know about you? What's important for you? Okay. So, another thing I have about local knowledge, I say, new knowledge grows out of the voices of ordinary people in conversation. That the new knowledge is produced in the conversation. The new knowledge does not have to come from the professional. The professional participates, of course, in facilitating a process and a relationship in which newness can be generated. And also that I have found it helpful to think in terms of new knowledge as not something big, like we often think of change has to be something big and dramatic that we can touch or we can feel. But sometimes change, or I prefer the word transforming or transformation, is subtle, and it can be something small. It can be just a small shift that might not even be noticed at first. But it's a step away from the ordinary path that allows someone to then take the next step as they so choose. I'm looking at the clock. It's already time for a pause. But what I'm going to do after the coffee pause is I'm going to shift then to what I call action guiding sensitivities. What do these then inform in terms of how we are? What do we do? How do we do it? To begin to respond to that.